We're starting at 10:25, right, Lori? Or
Yeah, you can start anytime now.
okay. Okay, so Lori talked about classic Xamarin, developing for iOS and Android using, shared code library, but not a shared code interface. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next 45 minutes. Cross-platform native user interfaces with Xamarin Forms. Somebody had a question about building, both UIs twice. Well, this is pretty much your answer to build a UI once. So I'm Mark from Redbit. There's my Twitter, all that stuff. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm also a Xamarin University trainer. So I'm pretty familiar with this stuff. And I just tweeted this out yesterday. I'm going to sidetrack, added a few extra slides. This is my first invoice from Xamarin. Way back in the day, $5.99. It was a little bit cheaper back then. It's really cheap now because it's free. But I got it in 2011, right? So it kind of makes me feel a little bit old. In 2011, I got my first license of Xamarin. And before that, it was Mono and all that stuff. So I just thought it was a pretty cool thing to share. Redbit, we're a Xamarin partner, we're a Microsoft partner, training partner, and a test cloud partner. I'm going to quickly go through those. This is the slide I want to get to. If anybody is looking, please talk to me for a job. We are hiring mobile devs. So let's get to the good stuff. So Xamarin Forms. Who's familiar with Xamarin Forms? All right. So a few people. So how did Xamarin Forms come about? So there was the primary issue. People were creating these applications, right? They were developing for iOS, they were developing for Android. It was great that you could share the code, but you couldn't share the UI, right? So they were duplicating a lot of work. And some of the applications, say for example, in a line of business application, you have a list, you have the details, maybe you have some buttons. So some applications were simple. This application here is the Xamarin Evolve app. Not as simple, it has a little bit more interaction. But across the platforms, you essentially have a list, you have a button, you have simple things, I think they are. At the bottom, you see you have a path control on the iOS one, so you could switch between different views within the application. So Xamarin looked at this, and they created Xamarin Forms. So the first Xamarin Forms came out. I'll admit, I used it. It was a real pain. But it worked. We got it working. We had to do a lot of custom renders, and I'll get into what custom renders are. But we got it to work for a customer. One thing to note is Xamarin Forms, it's an abstraction layer, but it renders the native controls. So it's not like the Java swing days where you know what a Java application looks like when you run it on the desktop. This one looks like a native application because it renders the native controls. They're not trying to recreate any controls or anything like that. So it'll go into the iOS and it'll render that control, say a button control, or into Android and it'll render the button control there, or to Windows and render it there. So like I said, this is the Xamarin Evolve app. You see many different form factors there. Built using Xamarin Forms, using XAML. You'll see a tablet one running on Windows. You see a Windows Phone one, or Windows Mobile now, I think. iOS, and then you've got Android right there. Pretty much all the same code across the different platforms. Now, if you remember this slide here, this is what Lori showed, the traditional approach. This is how we build our apps if you're not using Xamarin Forms. So you got your shared backend code, and then you got your UI code right at the top on iOS, Android, and Windows, which is C# and using the storyboard or the AXML files on Android, and on Windows you could use your regular XAML. But now with Xamarin Forms, you see the platform-specific code, it becomes almost non-existent, right? So now we have our shared UI code shared across all three platforms. Which makes it really nice because, if you're building a enterprise line of business app or something like that, you can, almost build once and run it on all three platforms. And if you're building a consumer-facing app, you could even do the same thing. And at the end, I'll show you some stuff that we're building where, I think Xamarin Forms is really great because we could build once. You're going to have to do a few tweakings on the different platforms, but that's expected, and get it to the customer a lot faster. So not only did the Xamarin team build out the controls, so they have a whole bunch of controls that are all the native controls that you could declare through XAML. You can also create them in C# code if you wanted to. How many people are familiar with XAML? Okay, almost all of you. It's pretty, that's what I expected. But XAML is, for those who don't know, it's basically a declarative markup language to create your UI. So it's XML based. I'll show you some XAML soon. But the Xamarin Forms abstraction layer has 40 plus pages, layouts, and controls that render natively onto the whatever OS you're running on. But not only is that in there, but there's also an MVVM engine within Xamarin Forms. Who's familiar with the MVVM pattern? Good. So MVVM is the way you want to go, but you're not forced to go that way. So if you want to use the MVVM engine that's built in, you can take advantage of the navigation and dependency service. MVVM has the automatic binding, so it's all built into Xamarin Forms for you. So you could use that. But again, you're not forced to use that. There's the messaging center in there. Again, these get into different topics. We have no time to discuss them. But you got the dependency service, so you could do dependency injection. That's where you want to load platform-specific code. And then you got the messaging center. You could do some nice animations, and I'll show you that too. So you can do nice animations within Xamarin Forms, and they'll render the native animations on the different platforms, which I think is great. So the two main things you have are pages and layouts. So pages right there, you see you have content, master detail page, navigation, tab, and carousel page. So content page is just, you want to throw up a bunch of content up there. Master detail page, that's where you have the slide out menu from the left, if you want to slide out the menu. And then the navigation page, that's where you want to navigate, say, from a list to a detailed view, and you could navigate down the stack and navigate back up to the root view. Tab page, you got the tabs at the bottom, Android and Windows, it'll put the tabs at the top. And the carousel page. Carousel is just if you want to flip through a bunch of, say, views or images or something like that, you can use the carousel page. And then to lay everything out, you have stack layout, absolute layout, relative, grid, content view, scroll view, and frame. So this is essentially where you're going to throw all your controls is in these layouts. So you could stack them up horizontally or vertically. You could stack up or set them up in absolute layout. You can set them up in a grid. So similar to XAML on Windows, you kind of have the same control. You also have the scroll view, so sometimes the pages are too big for the screen. So you just throw a scroll view in there, and then the scroll view will handle scrolling the page up and down. So those are your main controls and the options that you have. Now again, like I said, you have over 40 controls and layouts and pages and all that great stuff. These are the lowest common denominator that Xamarin has picked up. So you have, say for example, an entry that you see right there on the far left, second row. So the entry is basically your text box, right? It's a text box on Windows. On iOS, it's a UI input view, and on Android, I believe it's a text view or an input box. Not 100% sure on that. But we don't have to know, right? So if you want to get into the guts of iOS and Android, you can, or Windows, you can. But using Xamarin Forms, it's kind of abstracted away from you. So you just have to put in an entry element, and you're good to go. Now, if there's not a control that's available, there's a lot of partners that are building these controls. So you got Syncfusion, you got Telric, you got Infragistics, DevExpress, like all these companies will build or have Xamarin Forms controls that are available, and they also have controls for Xamarin iOS and Android if you're building in that architecture. So you can use these controls. I tend to build my own sometimes, but it's up to you. Sometimes it's faster just to buy a control than to build it, but I kind of like the challenge. So these are some of the controls. So I think a lot of you are familiar with Windows and building for Windows potentially. So there are some control differences between the platforms. So if you're coming from Windows, you're going to see stack panel is stack layout, right? Minor difference. Progress bar is on Xamarin Forms called an activity indicator. A checkbox is called a switch. List box is a list view. Text box is an entry. So those are, you're going to find those kind of small differences. And basically what the team did is they changed the name so it could be common across all three platforms. So with that, you also have data binding. Now, one thing to know, if you're building Windows apps, you can't just take that XAML code from your Windows and copy and paste it over to Xamarin Forms. It's most likely not going to work because of these differences. On the data binding side, it's almost the same, except the data context becomes binding context. And that's the main difference. All the rest is the same. You've got binding property, item source, item template, data template. So if you're familiar with data binding, who's familiar with data binding? Okay, good. You're familiar with it. So that's basically your only difference there. And then the XAML you see at the bottom there, that's basically your binding, if you're not familiar with it. So now, because we are on, we're potentially running on 3 different platforms, you do have the option to do some platform customization within the XAML. So right here, what this is saying is, we want to set the padding on the content page on iOS to have padding of 20 pixels at the top. And the rest for Android and Windows Phone, we want to keep it 0 all the way across. So that's how you could do some small platform customizations. Most likely on the iOS one, it's because you have the status bar at the top. And if you don't do that, your controls are going to be kind of colliding with the status bar, right? So you want to put that padding there. You can also do this in C#. Device.onPlatform is your code. F# too, if you want to write F#. But device on platform, if you want to do it in the code behind and do some customizations, that's essentially how you get that done. Any questions so far? All right. So here is a login page. So it's a simple concept. You need a username, you need a password, you need a button, and you need to log in, right? So with Xamarin Forms, you see on the right, you see our XAML declaration. It's a little bit small, you might not see it at the back. But essentially what we're saying is we want a tab page, and then we want to set our children of the tab page to a profile page and a settings page. And then the profile page is going to have a stack layout right there, and it's going to have 2 entries, text boxes. And these slides will be available, so it might be kind of hard to see. But you have 2 entries. You'll notice here, this entry is a password one, so we just want to set the Boolean value, or the property, is password equals to true, right? So then that way it'll put the asterisks and all that good stuff. And then the button, we go in there and we say the login button, and then set the background. We want white foreground or white text color, green background, and we have a command right there. So this is where the data binding comes in again, right? And it's all built into the platform. And we also have data binding on the entry fields. It binds to the username and the password, and it binds to some view model or anything like that. So you could bind it to that, and when you tap on the button, it's going to run the command, right? So similar to what Lori showed in the first one, you have your view model. You want to bind your UI to your view model, so you don't have to do too much UI code. You could basically declare everything in XAML, and then your UI will update, and the view model will update as the user types, or as the user does any actions within the application. So then at the bottom you have the settings page. Settings is just kind of commented out right there. But the main thing to notice is, look at iOS. iOS, users are expecting tab bar at the bottom, right? Who's built mobile apps? Okay. So how many of you have noticed that some users are really finicky? Yeah, okay. So how many of you on iOS, right? Like iOS users can get crazy sometimes. Android's getting that way too. But here, you could see iOS has the tab bar at the bottom, and Android and Windows have the tabs at the top, right? Because that's the platform. You want to make sure your application adheres to the platform, right? You don't want to piss off your users. If you're building a consumer-facing app, you're going to get a bad review. If you're building an enterprise app, you want to make sure your users, take care of an Android. You want to make it feel like it's an Android. I think that's the advantage of Xamarin Forms. Is it renders the native controls, right? That's what I like about it. On Android, you'll also get the swipe. I think on Windows, you'll get the swipe too, because you can swipe with your finger. iOS users, I guess, don't like that. They like to tap the buttons. But again, it's native implementation. It's native controls. All right. Who wants to see a demo? Enough of me blabbing. Okay. So I'm going to screw up the presentation. Change my resolution. Where am I here? Does this support 1080p?
Is it supposed to be smoking?
Ah, there we go. Sorry, stop. All right, I would have gone crazy if I had to code the other way. Okay, so I'm using Xamarin Forms, right? Or not Xamarin Forms, Xamarin Studio. So you can do this all on Windows within Visual Studio also, but I'm running on a Mac for now. So here, this is the weather app. You're gonna get you can get this on the GitHub repo. I think, Laurie, you'll make it available?
Yes.
Okay, you guys will get it later. But this is all available, all the sample code's available. And what I'm gonna do is just gonna show you the file new experience. So I'm gonna go file new solution. And if you remember what Laurie showed in Visual Studio, it's almost similar here, right? So here you have multi-platform. You have a Forms app, single view. You can create a sprite game. Then iOS, you have iOS-specific ones. tvOS, if you want to build for Apple TV, you can do that. And Android, you could do that. Notice we don't have any Windows stuff, obviously, because we're not on Windows, right? You need Windows to build the Windows applications. If you want to build for Xbox, HoloLens, you're gonna need a Windows for that. I do have a Windows back at the office, but I only carry a Mac right now. So here's the project that comes up that you'll get from the GitHub repo, and it's a simple weather application. So you notice we'll have four projects. So we have myweather.uwp. Can you guys see that? Okay. Okay. myweather.uwp, which is the Windows version, does load everything, but it's not going to run everything. It's not going to run it, obviously. And then we have myweather.ios, and this is all the iOS specific implementation. And then myweather.android, which is the Android specific implementation. All our code is down here. So if you remember the folder structure from the previous presentation, we have models, we have view models, we have services, but now we also have right here the views. So here are the views in XAML. So all our views are now within our PCL, our core library that we have for the MyWeather application. And then if we go and look at the native implementation of Windows, Android, and iOS, here is all we have. So all this code right here is the file new boilerplate code that comes out. So the only code that we add is right here. Xamarin.forms.init. And we're good to go. We could use Xamarin Forms. So you need to initialize it. This is the first thing you need to do. And on the Windows platform. On the iOS platform, same thing. Here we're doing a little bit extra code. We're changing the navigation bar appearance. We're hard coding it to blue, and you'll see why soon. And then Xamarin Forms.init, and then load application, passing in the app. I'll get into what the app is soon, but Android is pretty much the same thing, with the small change of forms.init. You have to pass the current activity, and you have to pass the bundle that came in the onCreate call. And that's your only platform-specific code. You could do more, but straight out of the box, this is essentially what you'll get with the Xamarin Forms application. And all the rest of the code is up here. So you got your views, your view models, your services, your models, everything is going to be up in your core library. And that's where you want to focus all your attention. So Lori mentioned how, with Objective-C and Java, you got your team separated. With the architecture, using the classic Xamarin, you're probably still going to need a iOS C# developer, somebody focusing on the iOS UI and then somebody focusing on the Android. That's how we do it when a customer wants to use that architecture. On the Xamarin Forms one, I mean, we could get away with one person coding for all three platforms, essentially, which is great from a budget point of view with customers, and internally. I mean, you guys, if you work in an enterprise, there's internal billing. You could set one developer to develop potentially the app for two platforms, right? So I think that's a huge advantage for whatever business. If you're building a consumer app, it's also a huge advantage for you, because you don't have to get into the native implementation. I'll be honest, sometimes you will, but most of the time you don't. And that's really, I think that's the advantage of Xamarin Forms. So I'm going to run this application. So you see here, it's going to start up. I'm running it on iOS. I don't have the Android simulators or anything, but you could run this if you want to run it on Windows, if you want to run it on Android. It's going to work exactly the same way. So here I put in Kitchener, use Imperial, yes or no. I'm going to say no. I'm going to call get weather. It's going to give us a temperature. Currently it's raining out there, and Kitchener is Waterloo. And then here's a list of the forecast, right? So we put the forecast in the list view. You notice there I could do a pull to refresh if I want to refresh the weather. And then I could just do another get weather. Notice the activity indicator, you quickly see it there. So you do see an activity indicator. And this is all driven by your view model. So I'm going to dig into a little bit of that now, how all that works. So let's get rid of our native code, because we're not going to touch it anymore. So I'm going to minimize those. And if you remember, app is your application. This is where everything starts off. So in our application, if you remember, we had tabs at the bottom. So we had a tab page. So we created a tab page through C#, right? And then we set the title, and then we set the binding context to this weather view model. I'll get into the weather view model. I'm going to show you the UI first. And then we're going to set some children right here to the weather view and the forecast view. And then for the app, we're going to set our main page to be a new navigation page and pass it the tab page as the parameter. And this is what's going to start up our application. Here you can set the bar background color and the bar text color. to the blue and the white foreground, and away you go. So the view model, let's hop into the models first. So the models, we're leveraging JSON.NET, to do to deserialize everything that's coming down from the service. And the service that we're using is this one here. Let me throw it on this screen so I can slide over quickly. So Open WeatherMap API. These are all it's basically sending you some JSON depending on what you're calling. So here we're calling a latitude, longitude. This is back in Oakville where I live. And then here we're saying Waterloo, and it's giving us the current temperature. And then we call another endpoint out here, which is, this is our forecast. This is what was shown in the list. And it has the weather, has an image that you could show, all that good stuff is in here. So if we switch back to here, these models, POCO objects, they'll serialize or deserialize that JSON, and you can access all the data. So I'm not going to go through it. The main one you'll probably want to know is weather root. Weather root is the one that has everything. It has the list of weather, and that's what we're going to bind to our UI. So what's going to pull all that is the service. So the service is what goes to the API and says, give me all the weather, here are the parameters, and pass me the JSON. So it's just using an HTTP client using async await. Familiar, everybody knows async await? Yeah, okay. It's just going to get a string, making sure it's not null, and deserialize the object into a weather root that the JSON brought back. Get weather, there's two get weathers. So there's one that provides latitude, longitude, and there's one that provides a city, if you want to pass in a city. And then we get the forecast, passing in the ID to grab the forecast of the actual city. So the ID comes back from right here. So here, this is the ID for the Waterloo area. So once we pass that in, we can get the forecast for that city. So where all this magic happens is from our view model. So our view model is what, if you remember in the app, that's our binding context, is our view model. So our view model drives our UI, and it drives it by this iNotify property change. iNotify property change, when anything is bound to it, to this view model, it's going to fire, as long as you fire it right here. If you change a property and then call this onProperty change, it's going to notify the UI, and then the UI is just going to magically update. So you don't have a lot of code behind to update your UI. It's your view model that is pushing these updates to the UI. So it's a nice, elegant way to do it. Definitely recommend using MVVM if you haven't used it. This is the onProperty change right here. So property change is the new C#6 feature. This is basically saying if it's null, don't do anything. If it's not null, invoke the method. And anybody who's listening for this event will be notified. And that's all that does. And then any property that you want to notify the UI, you have to call that onProperty change, and you're good to go. If you bind any of this to your UI, like I said, is going to update. So you notice here what we have some is busy. So remember these things because we're going to use them again. So we have is busy, we have the temperature, we have the condition, which are just string values, is imperial, which is a Boolean, depending on what the user wants to use. We have a use GPS too, which is currently not used, and a location. And the magic happens within this command, right? So this command is what's going to go out, and it's going to change some properties. It's going to say, if it's busy, we don't want to run it again. If it's not busy, we want to keep going. We want to change our Boolean value. And then we just want to go in and we want to call the get weather service. This is where all the code happens. All your business logic is going to happen. So let's switch into the weather view. Right? Does anybody have any questions? Because if you've never seen MVVM, this could get confusing. Yeah.
So, compared to Android development,
Yeah.
Android, like I've done more Android-based stuff, actual, Java Android
Yeah.
and Xamarin Android, and it's very similar. That's
Okay.
what I mentioned, the view was the same, right? You have your on create, and
Yes.
you have a lot of the same concepts, right?
Yeah, you have all those concepts. So all those concepts they're abstracted in here, on start, on sleep, on resume.
Okay.
But you could also wire them up from the native one if you need to.
So the question that I had was on building an iOS app right now.
Yeah.
MVVM is only applicable to iOS or?
No, it's cross-platform. So it's just a pattern.
Because of forms, Xamarin Forms, right?
You could use it within Xamarin Forms because of the data binding that's there.
Okay.
But I've used MVVM in non-Xamarin Forms applications too. So you can use MVVM in Xamarin Classic, or Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, where you have the different UIs. You can still use MVVM. There are libraries out there, MVVM Cross, MVVM Lite, that help you accomplish the data binding and everything. So you can do it. You're going to have to pull in some different MVVM libraries that are available to do it without Xamarin Forms. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Good to go? All right. So, we have our view models. View models updates our views. So let's go into the actual view. Let's go into the weather view. And this is our example. This is our implementation of our UI. So we have a content page first, which you can see right there. And then we have a stack layout, right? We have some padding, we have some spacing that we set. We have our entry, and it's a text entry, so it's a text box. And we bind it to the location property. So if you remember in our view model, we have our location property here, which is just a string. So whenever that location changes, our view will update. So let me go back. And then we have another stack layout. Stack layout, you could put the option of the orientation of horizontal or vertical. Here we decided to put horizontal because we want to show a label, and then right beside it we want to show a switch. The switch is data bound to isImperial on the view model side. So then the view model knows if this switch ever changes, then the view model knows what to actually show, and it is used here, right there. If it's imperial, we want to use units imperial, else use metric. Right? It's pretty straightforward. But you notice that we don't have any code calling into the view model. It's all driven from from XAML. We have a button that is data bound using the command property, data bound into the get weather command. The get weather command is this right here. Get weather command, which basically uses async await, calls execute get weather, and runs our magic here. Calls the weather service, gets everything, and this weather service will call the weather root and set that property, and that is set within, where is it? Well, now weather root, it's calling forecast. So we set the forecast to be able to set the ListView, right? So this forecast is weather forecast root, and then in the weather forecast root, we have a list of items, right? So if you remember that, we're going to go back to the forecast view. Here we have a list view, and we're data binding the item source, which is basically a collection of items, and it's saying it's the forecast.items. So you could use the properties of the of what you're binding to if it's an object, right? You can use those properties. And then in here, if you want to do pull to refresh, really easy. Pull to refresh equals true. Refresh command is just going to call the get weather command. So when you do that pull to refresh, it's just going to call that command again instead of clicking the button. And then when it's refreshing, remember the isBusy property, right, where we're setting it in our logic there. Is refreshing is actually what shows the activity indicator within the list. And then that isBusy is also right here. So we have a separate activity indicator over here within our the weather view. We just put an activity indicator and we bind is running and is visible to isBusy. And that's it. That drives your entire UI. When data comes back, the temp and the conditions is set by the command, and it's going to update our UI. So all this stuff here, that's essentially how all the magic is happening. Right? So a lot of things that you don't have to worry about. In terms of the code behind, we have some platform-specific code behind here. So if we're on iOS, we want to set the tab icon, right? Android and Windows don't have tab icons, so we don't have to do that, but here we want to set some tab icons. So this is our only code behind that we have. Everything else is driven by the data binding engine, right? So now, any questions? All right, good. So now what I'm going to do is, because I don't like typing, both on my keyboard and on my phone, we're going to do this right here. So remember that use GPS property. We're going to use that to see if we should use GPS. So here we're using a plugin. So Lori talked about plugins during the end of her presentation. I think sharing code and plugins and dependency injection, that's a whole other hour. So, there's just not enough time. If you have questions about that, ask us about that. We could go on for hours on that. But you can do some real cool stuff. There's stuff on GitHub, on NuGet. James, like Lori said, he's got a bunch of stuff on there. Cross geolocator is one of them. Cross geolocator is basically using dependency services to be able to grab your GPS location depending on what device you're on. So it uses dependency injection, and I'll show you the references here. So XAM plugin.geolocator. You notice we have newtonsoft.json, json.net. We have it in there. It's the same one you're using in your ASP.NET or your UWP. Same one you're using. So XAM plugin, geolocator. We also have a XAM plugin for settings. XAM plugin for settings allows you to save local settings. So when you, in this example here, when you change the, just go in there and I'll show you the location. When you change the location, you can set the city and it'll persist it locally. Right here. So again, this code is available. I'm not going to get too much into this. But you do have all these plugins available to you, and you also have plugins like text-to-speech, right? So once you install these packages, what you also want to do is install the platform-specific packages. So here you see Android has a whole bunch of stuff. Where is it? Up here. XAM plugin geolocator, XAM plugin settings, and XAM plugin text-to-speech. This is the Android platform-specific implementation, because doing geolocation on Android is different from doing geolocation on Windows, and it's different from doing geolocation on iOS, right? Everybody wants to be different. So that's, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Mac, but I'm the iOS person. I have my business, so. This is the iOS one. You see the same thing. And don't know if Windows will show us the references. You know, believe me that Windows has the same type of thing. It just doesn't show us the references here. When you open up in Visual Studio, you won't see this anymore because it's going to work in Visual Studio. But the great thing is, one thing I didn't mention is the same solution file works in Xamarin Studio and it works in Visual Studio. So if you have people working on Mac or if you have people working on Windows, it's not a big deal, right? You can use the same solution file, use Git or TFS, whatever you use. You can use that same solution file to make things happen. So, how am I for time? How much time do I have?
2 minutes?
Seriously?
5 minutes, yeah, because then Jonathan has to go and he has to do 40 minutes.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna speed it up. Under day, dev days, step 2. Here's our text to speech, right? So we're gonna run this again. This is the last part of the demo, so we'll get back to slides. One thing I forgot to add. Our UI. I'm just going to copy and paste, use GPS, and restart. So there you go. You know, very quickly I was able to add a new switch.
12.33 degrees Celsius Cupertino, missed.
Beautiful. That's it. A couple lines of code, you get, text to speech. This is all the same.
12.33 degrees Celsius Cupertino, missed.
Where's my presentation? Because I still have quite a few slides. So, Evolve, Xamarin 2.0 came out. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but I'm going to go through these next few slides fairly quickly to give Jonathan his appropriate time. This is open source too. Open.xamarin.com. If you want to go in there and figure out how they did all this, you can do it. I'll be honest, I went in there and I tried to figure it out too. Performance. You may run into performance issues if you start doing a lot of things within there. If you start layering or stacking things a lot, or you may run into performance issues. Look up Xamarin Evolve Performance by Jason Smith. He did a whole presentation on Xamarin Forms performance. All these performance issues can be overcome. This is one of the main ones right here, improve scrolling performance. You want to set it to, the caching strategy is, Lori, which one is the good one? I drew a blank. Everybody's making
Ask
me rush.
Jonathan.
Recycle.
Is it recycle? Okay, yeah, it's recycle. So the recycle one, I think retain element right now is the default, but eventually it'll be recycle element will be default. So if you're having some ListView performances, this is your first thing to try. XAML compilation, definitely turn that on. Before it would be parsed and inflated at runtime, so you may run into some issues if you type something in wrong. XAML C will compile everything when you compile, and it'll turn it into IL code. Faster loading, so everybody wants a faster loading app. It is a smaller app size because it gets rid of all that XAML that's in there, that's embedded within the app. Not that much smaller, but it's, every bit helps. And again, XAML errors at runtime instead of runtime, which will drive you crazy. Some of the items, so here, data templates. So here you see we have a chat application. The sender and the receiver has a different style. So you could use data templates to show a different style depending on a variable. You definitely want to do this. You don't want to switch these things using data binding because that will be a performance hit. Carousel View, if you remember, we have Carousel Page. Now we have Carousel View where you could swipe up here. You could embed a Carousel View within a page and have other controls within there. So definitely something to look at. It enhances your app. The iOS, the App Store. If you want to do something like that, you could do that. Effects. This is brand new. Effects you want to look at if you want to do slight customization to the controls on the platforms. If you want to do heavy customizations, you're going to have to look into custom renderers. Custom renderers is another hour topic. If you're interested, I can give you more details on that. But effects you definitely want to look at if you want to do simple things like this one here adds a border color when it's focused and then gets rid of the border width, right? And this one is specific to iOS. Effects you're going to have to do specific for every platform. And there's tons more. Xamarin Evolve, I recommend look at the Xamarin Evolve videos, the keynotes if you want to see all the new stuff's coming out. New stuff's coming out almost every day. Xamarin, the XAML previewer, I think it's in the beta channel now, or is it in alpha still?
No, it should be in the
It's in. Is it stable? I haven't upgraded yet. I have to deliver some projects first. So it's going to be in one of the channels, but basically it allows you to preview your XAML code on the different platforms, on phone or tablet, on Android or iOS. Currently it's only on Xamarin Studio. It is coming to Visual Studio. URL navigation, definitely look at this. So it's built in. This is something very new. If you're searching within your say iOS or Android, you see right there at the end, building universal Windows app. You could embed your application within the search results, right, for your app. So something to integrate with the platform. This is actually really good if you want to get users to start using your app. Integrate with the platform in these ways. Data pages. Basically, what this will do, you'll see the link at the bottom. Data pages will take take Azure endpoints and JSON and generate some pages for you. So make it a lot easier. I haven't used it yet, but you have standard ones like contacts, events, and photos. It'll create all these things for you, and you could theme them, right? So themes are also fairly new. So themes, you could go in there and set themes, a dark theme or a light theme or anything like that for your application, and make things look a little bit nicer within there. Native embedding. So native embedding allows you to bring native controls within your Xamarin application. So there you see we have a material design floating button, which is what they do on Android. They put the floating button there, and then on iOS you have the I don't even know what that control is called, but you have kind of like a tab control at the top. But you could bring these native controls into your XAML, into your Xamarin Forms application, and this is an example here, where that's a button, a custom control created that uses SVG animations on Android, and it's brought into the Xamarin Forms application. I will replay that again, and you'll see some pretty slick animations within the button that happen when you push the actual button. That's how you embed it. You do start getting into if-defs, compiles. You're going to have to use that in a shared project, right? So, and hopefully I did it within 5 minutes. I think it was 7. And that's it. There's my email. Questions. I will be around all day. Hope you enjoyed it.
We're not going to have a 20-minute break. We're going to have a 5-minute.
5 minutes.
So you know. 5 minutes.
And that's the whole point. Like it's trying to do what changes to this.
The demos that you've seen, as well as the hands-on labs. So definitely do that over the course of lunch. We're going to take an hour break. So from 12 to 1, it's just We're gonna eat, we're gonna get our machines going and set up and just network and talk to other people. If you're having issues with your environment, definitely grab Mark, grab Jonathan or myself. We'll come over and help you get that sorted out. And pizzas at the back. If you are a vegetarian, there is a vegetarian option. There's 3 stacks of pizzas right there. The vegetarian option is the 3rd stack. So have at it. Have a good lunch, guys. Thanks. There's a README file that gives you instructions step by step on what to do, and you can start off in the starter project, open that up, make sure you can build it. If you're having trouble building and running, and you're running into kind of obstacles with that, let us know. But don't let that hold you up. Try and get through some of the steps of understanding like the architecture of the application, the code, where the code goes, where the layouts are, how to formulate the project, and kind of get your app, architected. And then we'll help you with some build issues where we can. Okay, so definitely get started. Raise your hand if you are having issues. I'm gonna come over and see you, and then we'll, between Mark, myself, and John, we will help you guys out. So, yep, get to it. By updating the NuGet packages, and you know that your Android SDK is up to date. I would recommend just creating a new project. Pick blank Xamarin Forms portable template in the cross-platform section. Build that, and if that builds successfully, then just start adding in the project files from that starter project into that new project shell. There seems to be some kind of references that seem to be mucked up.
Yeah, I think it's, what happens is when you install some of the Android support library components or NuGet packages, because of the way Google's licensed them, we can't actually redistribute those. So at build time, it's actually going out and fetching that from Google for you. And it's like a 260 meg file. And so given network conditions, I've seen it once already where it's been a corrupt download. So if, the other thing that we can do is I can put up the path where you can delete some files from and try rebuilding and see if it takes. Yeah, that one's a tricky one to do in this setting.
Yeah.
This is all that you're working.